Scary telling.
I always knew that my son had a vivid imagination, but what he told me one night sent shivers down my spine. It was just after his bedtime, and I was tucking him in when he turned to me and said, "Daddy, my mirror image is trying to take my place." At first, I thought he was just being silly, as children often are, but he seemed genuinely afraid. He went on to explain that when he stood in front of his mirror, his reflection would sometimes move independently of him. It would make faces, or shake its head, or even raise its fists as if ready to fight. And then, one day, it spoke to him. It said it wants to live in the real world, my son said, his eyes wide with fear. It said it's tired of being trapped in the mirror. I tried to reassure him that it was just his imagination, that there was no such thing as a mirror image that could come to life. But he was insistent, and I could tell he was genuinely frightened. I promised him that I would look into it, but I wasn't sure what I could do. Over the next few days, my son's behavior grew increasingly erratic. He would have outbursts of anger for no apparent reason, or he would be listless and withdrawn. He would spend long hours staring at himself in the mirror, as if waiting for something to happen. Then, one night, I woke up to a strange sound coming from his room. It sounded like someone tapping on the window. I got up to investigate, and when I looked outside, I saw nothing but darkness. But when I turned back to my son's room, I saw something that made my blood run cold. His mirror was glowing with an eerie green light, and my son's reflection was moving on its own. It was writing something on the mirror with its finger, but the letters were backwards and upside down. I couldn't make sense of it at first, but then I realized what it said. "Let me out." I rushed into my son's room and turned on the lights, but the mirror was back to normal. My son was fast asleep in his bed, but his right hand was covered in green paint as if he had been writing on the mirror. That's when I noticed something even more disturbing. He was using his left hand to hold the pen. From that moment on, things only got worse. My son became increasingly withdrawn, barely speaking to me or anyone else. He would spend all his time in front of the mirror, talking to his reflection in hushed tones. Sometimes, he would laugh maniacally, as if he was sharing some sort of secret joke with his mirror image. One night, I woke up to the sound of glass breaking. When I rushed into my son's room, I saw that he had smashed the mirror with a hammer. His hand was bleeding, but he seemed almost relieved. He looked at me with tears in his eyes and said, "It's gone. The mirror image is gone." But it wasn't gone. It was just waiting for the right moment to strike. A few days later, my son disappeared. There was no sign of a struggle, no clue as to where he had gone. The only thing left behind was a note, written in backwards letters with green ink. "Thank you for letting me out. I'll take good care of him." To this day, I still don't know what happened to my son. But sometimes, when I'm alone in the dark, I can hear his voice calling to me from the other side of the mirror. And I know that I should never, ever look into it again. I tried everything to find my son, but all my efforts were in vain. The police couldn't find any leads, and none of our neighbors or friends had seen or heard anything suspicious. I was left alone with my thoughts, my guilt, and my fear. As time passed, strange things started happening in my house. Doors would open and close on their own, objects would move without explanation, and I would hear footsteps in empty rooms. But the worst part was the mirror. Every time I walked past it, I felt a sense of unease, as if something was watching me from the other side. And sometimes, when I looked at my reflection, I swear I could see a pair of glowing green eyes staring back at me. I tried to ignore it, to convince myself that it was all in my head. But then, one night, I woke up to the sound of tapping on the mirror. I got up to investigate, but as soon as I got close, the tapping stopped. And then, I heard a voice. It was my son's voice, but it was distorted, as if it was coming from a different dimension. It said, "Daddy, help me. It won't let me go." I was terrified, but I knew I had to do something. I grabbed a hammer and smashed the mirror, hoping that it would break the connection between my world and the other side. But it didn't work. Instead, the room was filled with a blinding green light, and I felt a force pulling me towards the broken mirror. I tried to resist, but it was like being caught in a whirlpool with no escape. And then, I saw it. My son's mirror image, but it wasn't a reflection anymore. It was a real, tangible being with glowing green eyes and a wicked smile. It said, "Welcome to my world, Daddy. I've been waiting for you." I tried to run, but it was like running through quicksand. The mirror image was getting closer and closer, and I knew that I was doomed. But then, I had an idea. I took out a pocket mirror that I had in my pocket and held it up to the mirror image's face. And then, something miraculous happened. The mirror image started to shrink until it was small enough to fit inside the pocket mirror. I snapped the mirror shut and put it in my pocket, and the green light vanished. I was back in my room, alone, but alive. I don't know what happened to my son's mirror image, but I know that I'll never forget the horror of that night. And I'll never look at a mirror the same way again. I had been playing this game for weeks, trying to beat the final boss. It was a tough battle, and I had failed 8 times before. On the 9th attempt, I thought I had finally beaten it. But just as I was about to deliver the final blow, I made a crucial mistake and got killed. I was so angry that I shouted out loud and slammed my controller onto the desk. That's when things got weird. The monitor flickered, and I saw my avatar, still on the screen, pounding on the other side of the screen. It was as if it was alive, and it was screaming at me, "Don't leave me." I was freaked out. I had never seen anything like this before. I thought maybe I was hallucinating, or maybe it was just a glitch in the game. I tried to turn off the monitor, but it wouldn't go dark. The game was still running, and my avatar was still there, begging me not to leave. I tried to shut down the computer, but it wouldn't turn off either. I was trapped. It was like the game had taken on a life of its own, and I was stuck in it. Suddenly, the scenery on the screen changed. I was no longer in the game's final level. Instead, I was in a dark and sinister forest. The trees were gnarled and twisted, and the sky was a deep shade of purple. My avatar was gone, and I was alone. I tried to move, but my legs wouldn't work. I was stuck, just like I was in the game. And then I heard something. It was a low, guttural growl coming from somewhere in the darkness. I was scared, but I knew that I had to keep moving. I tried to drag myself forward, but it was no use. I was stuck in place. And then, out of nowhere, a creature appeared. It was unlike anything I had ever seen before. It was tall and gaunt, with long arms and legs that ended in sharp claws. Its eyes glowed red in the darkness, and its teeth were bared in a vicious snarl. It was the final boss, come to life. I tried to fight it, but my avatar was nowhere to be seen. I was defenseless. The creature advanced towards me, its claws outstretched, ready to tear me apart. Just as it was about to strike, the screen went black. The computer shut down, and everything was silent. I sat there for a long time, just staring at the dark screen. I couldn't believe what had just happened. It was like the game had taken over my entire world. And then, suddenly, the monitor flickered back to life. But instead of the game, I saw something even more terrifying. It was a message, written in blood-red letters. You can never leave. You are mine now. I don't know what happened after that. I don't know how long I sat there, staring at the screen. But I do know that I never played that game again. And I never will. Because sometimes, when I'm alone in the dark, I can still hear my avatar pounding on the other side of the screen, screaming at me not to leave. And I know that I'm trapped forever. I used to have an imaginary friend named Lily. She was my best friend and we did everything together. I would talk to her for hours and she would always listen. My parents never really understood our friendship, but they let me be. Yesterday, my parents sat me down and told me that I was too old for an imaginary friend and that I needed to let her go. I was devastated. I didn't want to say goodbye to my best friend. But they were firm in their decision and I had no choice. That night, I went to bed feeling empty and alone. It was strange not having Lily by my side. I tried to sleep, but I kept hearing strange noises coming from my closet. I dismissed it as my imagination running wild and tried to go back to sleep. But then I heard her voice. "Why did you leave me?" she said. I sat up in bed, my heart racing. I couldn't believe it. Lily was real. I jumped out of bed and ran to my closet. I opened the door and there she was, standing in the shadows. But something was different about her. Her face was pale and her eyes were dark. She looked sickly, like she hadn't eaten in days. "Lily, what happened to you?" I asked. She just stared at me, her eyes vacant. "You left me all alone," she said. I tried to touch her, but my hand went straight through her. She was just a ghost of my former imaginary friend. I didn't know what to do. I was scared and alone with a ghost that only wanted me to suffer. I tried to leave the room, but she followed me. Every time I turned around, she was there, her dark eyes boring into mine. I realized that I had made a mistake. I shouldn't have let her go. I needed her. But it was too late. She was gone, and I was left with a ghost that haunted me every night. The next morning, I told my parents about what had happened. They didn't believe me, of course. They thought I was just upset about losing my imaginary friend. But I knew the truth. Lily was real, and she was never going to leave me alone. Days turned into weeks and weeks turned into months. Lily was always there, haunting me wherever I went. I stopped going to school and stopped seeing my friends. I was trapped in my own house with a ghost that only wanted to hurt me. Yesterday, my parents found her body. They had been searching for her for months. It turned out that Lily wasn't imaginary after all. She had been kidnapped by a man who had been posing as her friend. He had stalked her and left her in a closet to die. I was devastated. Lily had been my friend all along, and I had let her down. I had let her die alone in that closet. And now, she was gone forever. But even though Lily was gone, her ghost still haunted me. She still appeared to me every night, her dark eyes staring into mine. I knew that I would never be free from her. She would always be there, haunting me, reminding me of my mistake. My grandmother always told me that seeing the angel of death was a gift. She said that it was a sign that the person living inside the house was about to pass on and that it was an honor to witness the arrival of the angel. I was always fascinated by this and would spend hours staring out the window, hoping to catch a glimpse of the angel of death. It wasn't until I turned 18 that I finally saw it for the first time. It was a cold, rainy night, and I was walking home from work when I saw it. It was a dark figure standing in front of a house, its wings stretching out behind it. I was frozen in place, watching as it faded away into the night. I knew then that someone in that house was going to die. I didn't tell anyone about what I had seen. I didn't want to sound crazy or superstitious. But as the days went on, I began to see the angel of death more and more often. It was always standing in front of a different house, its presence unmistakable. I began to feel like I was being followed, like the angel of death was watching me. I tried to ignore it, but the feeling only grew stronger. I couldn't escape the sight of the angel of death, even when I closed my eyes. Its image was burned into my mind, haunting me day and night. One day, I couldn't take it anymore. I went to my grandmother's house and told her everything. She listened patiently, nodding along as I spoke. "It's a gift, my dear," she said, her voice soft and kind. "But it's also a burden. Not everyone is meant to carry it." I didn't understand what she meant until the day I saw the angel of death in front of my own house. I knew then that I was the one who was going to die. Panic set in, and I tried to run away, but the angel of death was always there, waiting for me. I spent the next few days in a constant state of fear, waiting for death to come for me. But it never did. The angel of death remained, watching me from a distance. And then, one day, it was gone. I thought that it was finally over, that I had been spared. But I was wrong. The angel of death had only moved on to the next person, and the next, and the next. I watched as my friends, my family, and even strangers passed away one by one, their houses marked by the presence of the angel of death. I couldn't take it anymore. I was tired of being burdened with this gift, this curse. I went back to my grandmother's house and begged her to take it away from me. "I'm sorry, my dear," she said, her eyes full of sorrow. "Once you see the angel of death, you can never unsee it. It will follow you until the end." And she was right. The angel of death has been with me ever since, a constant reminder of my mortality. I don't know when it will come for me, but I know that it will. And until then, I will continue to see it in front of every house, a silent harbinger of death. I was walking home from a late night shift when I heard someone running up behind me. I turned to see a disheveled man, his eyes wide with fear, running towards me. "Help me," he screamed. "Somebody locked me in a basement, blindfolded me, and starved me for days. Please, you have to help me." I could see the fear in his eyes, and my heart went out to him. I grabbed his arm and pulled him to a stop, trying to calm him down. Okay, just calm down. Let's get you some help." But then he looked up at me, and his face went white. "Oh my God," he whispered. "It's you." I didn't understand. "What? What do you mean?" And then he told me the most terrifying story I had ever heard. He said that he had been walking home from work a few days ago when he was grabbed from behind and dragged into a van. He was blindfolded and driven to a remote location where he was locked in a basement and left to starve. And the person who had done it, the person who had tormented him for days, was me. "I know it sounds crazy," he said, tears streaming down his face. But I heard your voice. Your exact voice. You were the one who did this to me. I was horrified. I had never seen this man before in my life. But as he continued to describe the torture he had endured, I began to feel like I was losing my mind. What if I had done this? What if I had locked him up and starved him? But I couldn't have. I had been working every day for the past week. I had an alibi. But then I started to notice something strange. The man looked exactly like me. It was like looking into a mirror, only with the reflection twisted and distorted. I tried to convince myself that it was just a coincidence, that he was just someone who looked like me. But the fear in his eyes was too real, and the more I looked at him, the more convinced I became that there was something sinister at play. We went to the police, and I was cleared of any suspicion. But the man's story stuck with me, haunting me every time I looked in the mirror. I started to see things that weren't there, like shadowy figures lurking in the corners of my room. And then, one night, I woke up to find the man standing at the foot of my bed. He was still disheveled, still thin and frail. But this time, his eyes were different. They were cold and full of hatred. "You got away with it," he hissed. "But I know the truth. And I'm going to make you pay." And then he disappeared, leaving me alone in the darkness. The next few weeks were a blur of fear and paranoia. I saw the man everywhere I went, always watching me with those cold, hateful eyes. I couldn't escape him, no matter how hard I tried. And then, one day, he was gone. I never saw him again. But the fear he had instilled in me never left. Even now, years later, I still look over my shoulder, wondering if he'll come back. Because sometimes, while I'm alone in the dark, I can hear his voice whispering in my ear, reminding me of the horror he endured. And I know that he's still out there, waiting for his revenge.